Hitherto, all people we conventionally refer to as historians are to be thought of as prehistorians. There's only one objective historian. It's called Netflixius, and the people at Netflix are the only ones who have access to his annals of history. And he says basically that homosexuality was incredibly prevalent in ancient Greece, and especially when it comes to Alexander the Great and Achilles and Patroclus. I don't know, when I read the Iliad, I never saw the passage where Achilles and Patroclus were rubbing tips or something.
Nope.
It just wasn't there.
I mean, there's the passage where they're with their women, and then there's Achilles being like, he took my woman, I need my woman back, I'm deeply in love with her, but he doesn't actually have sex with a man.
Yeah, but I don't know, maybe that was a way of
subtly hinting that he was gay.
Subtly
being obsessed
hinting,
about
yeah.
his wife and concubine, yeah.
Anyway, now speaking of resisting dumbing down, you can visit a website. Calvin Robinson has joined us, and you can use the code CRUSADE to take 50% off gold tier. And this is for new subscribers and those who upgrade. And also you can send video comments for fatherly advice, and make it clear that it is for Calvin if you want to send it to Calvin by opening with Dear Father Calvin. It helps us sort our emails out. Now, let's move forward. Netflix made a documentary about Alexander the Great called The Making of a God. And within the first 8 minutes, they turned him gay.
Can I just point out that Netflixius has got this wrong? Because as I was aware, Alexander was black.
Yeah, I thought he was played by Denzel Washington, personally.
Yeah.
Well, he also hints that Caesar wasn't a lesbian. So that's also a problem.
Caesar?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, Caesar was a lesbian. Yeah.
How's Netflixius is someone who has got some things wrong. So anyway, what you see there's a video with Alexander in very intimate relationships with Hephaestion. He was a man of penetrating military insight. And they had several community notes on this tweet by N Wokeness, because...
And I noticed the community notes are all gone.
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, so I rate all of them as unhelpful. And I wasn't the only one. Let's say. Okay, so what was fun about this is that if you see here, you don't have to look at that, but there's a dude here, a Netflix dude, saying there was no vocabulary in Greece about homosexuality. There was just being sexual.
That's not true.
So that's profoundly mistaken. And let me just say that because this has to do with one of the worst features of ancient Greece, the direction of sexuality and attraction was profoundly understood. And the word pedo comes from pederasty. And if they didn't understand that where sexuality is channeled and where attraction is coming from, they wouldn't have coined that word.
Yeah.
So this is someone who is genuinely claiming that he is making a historical account of actual figures and knows nothing about the culture he's talking about, even in its bad features.
You can read Plato's Symposium, and you know it's a short book. It doesn't take very long, and you'll get all you need to know about that sort of thing. It disproves what he says.
Well, I mean,
I can't believe he hasn't read it if he's talking about ancient Greece.
Well, in Xenophon's Anabasis, he gives you a description of the 10 generals of the army and points out that one of them is a notorious boy lover. And he had a lust for boys, and this was just something that Xenophon says. This is just a characteristic of this man's personality. And then he carries on. So they absolutely did have a language and an understanding of that. So I don't know why he would say that. Hi folks, sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to direct your attention to the aesthetics range of merch that we have on the store. These are beautiful images that I think work really well as posters or mugs. So if you want to support us, going over to the merch store at shop.lotus.com is easily the best way other than signing up on the website.
Yes, so let me just say here that you would expect the main sources, the main historians who wrote about Alexander to write about things like that explicitly. And the main historians they are Arrian, Quintus Curtius Rufus, Diodorus of Sicily, and Plutarch. But they didn't write explicitly about scenes of homosexuality. They didn't.
They did write explicitly about scenes of heterosexuality.
They did.
So they would have mentioned it.
They would have mentioned it. And speaking of the Anabasis of Cyrus, there is also a very weird passage with a guy called Episthenes, who absolutely fell in love with a boy that was about to be executed, and went to Xenophon and the other leaders of the Greek mercenaries who were trying to go back to Greece, and he told them basically, just I don't want to live and carry on without this boy, and they allowed it and they left. So if you would write something like that about a soldier, you would expect the main historians to write something like that about Alexander the Great.
Yeah. If it was something that he did, they would have mentioned it, like they did for other people who did that.
Yes.
And they mentioned it.
And although they didn't use the word homosexuality because it's not a Greek word, although it has some Greek origins, they absolutely had an idea of where the phenomenon. And also, let me just say, in the Symposium of Plato that you mentioned, there is a myth of Aristophanes who's talking about the origins of attraction. And he says something like, in the beginning, human beings were composite bodies, and you had men and men in one body, women and women in another body, and men and women in one body. And Zeus thought that he should punish them for their pride and split them up with thunder. And ever since, they are trying to join the body of their previous body. And anyway, Plato has the idea that this is a very sexual analysis of the situation. But the point is that that is a myth that is used as an explanation for how you can have all the kinds of attraction among human beings. So the idea that there was zero understanding of it is completely ridiculous. And also, let me just say, there are many passages where people refer to things like that. And one thing also, which is weird, Aristotle in the Politics talks about homosexuality, and also how in some ancient cultures it wasn't seen as necessarily bad, and it wasn't. He also mentions the Celts as being very tolerant of homosexuality.
Celts are lame and gay.
So if there was zero understanding of that, there would be no passages of the sort. Speaking of Aristotle, you can definitely check our premium content and the symposium we did with Carl on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics Part 1 and Part 2. You can subscribe with £5 a month to all our premium content, and be sure to give it a watch. Now, let me just say also, because there's another idea about the word. There's also the word kinedos, and I'm gonna talk about the Oxford University Press blog, which is not just any website. It has some interesting features here about the word, and they say the word in 4th century BCE. The orator Demosthenes is labeled akinedos in the courtroom by his opponent in order to besmirch his masculinity and accuse him of shameless conduct. In the Gorgias, Plato cites the life of the Kinedi as being the prime example of hedonistic living. Roman authors are more detailed as to what exactly makes the Kinedos behavior so wretched. Catullus, Martial, and Juvenal all portray Kinedi as desiring sexual penetration by other men, and often as displaying extreme effeminacy. And anyway, they are saying about the term here, and let me just also say that there was a kind of twerking involved, and that should generate an issue about cultural appropriations, especially on Netflix, because it says that Martial and Juvenal specifically associate this individual with a particular form of dance in which the kinedos wiggles his buttocks salaciously. So it's a form of a male twerker.
So what you're saying is that black women in America are culturally appropriating ancient Greek culture.
I don't know. I think essentially, if you look at deep into the old groups that are the protected groups of those who play identity politics in the left, they're not compatible groups.
Did you have waffle houses in ancient Greece? I'm sure people were fighting in
I am definitely
America.
certain that we did. Okay. Now, one thing to say, because the community notes were the worst community notes ever. And when you could definitely see so many community notes being taken down.
Yeah.
And people, they reacted very vehemently and they said, no, it's an absolute fact that Alexander was gay or bisexual. And here's the evidence. And if you click the links, it just didn't suggest anything.
Yeah.
Most of them were just, trust me, bro. I'll show you some of them. But let me just say the other thing, because they just had the passage from Arian.
Yep.
And I'm just going to show you some bits of it. At Ekbatana, Alexander offered the sacrifice just as he was accustomed to do after any success, and held athletic and musical contests. Hephaestion fell ill. On the 7th day of his illness, they say that the stadium was full, as there was an athletic competition for boys on that day. When Alexander was told that Hephaestion was in a bad way, he quickly left to go to him, but he was no longer living by the time he arrived. And anyway, they're saying basically he was profoundly grieving.
Oh, no.
What's so gay about mourning?
Well,
Being upset that your friend died.
yeah, your best friend's died, and you're like, oh, God, oh, that's right, you're a homo.
Yeah, so I want to say that basically this is bad against straight people because it suggests and is based on the assumption that straight people don't have feelings.
It's also a cultural difference, right?
Well, there's also an element of it. It reveals something about the people asserting that this proves anything, that
Right.
you can't have a relationship with someone without it being sexual.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very Freudian.
Very porn brain.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
But the thing I think is interesting is in Anglo culture, crying is very unmanly, whereas actually in ancient Greek culture, crying was an appropriate expression of sentiment. So, I mean, Alexander spends like 3 days mourning in his tent or something for Hephaestion. This is totally normal and completely appropriate in that culture. That wouldn't be appropriate in our culture, but we're different people in a different time, a different place with different mores. So this doesn't. So what our perspective from now, this seems like a very strange and excessive gushing of emotion, but that's only because we're different to them.
And let me just say that this has to do with the publicity of emotion. And especially, you can find it in Greece and Italy right now,
Yeah.
especially in the Mediterranean, South Mediterranean. And you have plenty of theatricality
Yeah.
into it. That's why if you compare the politics and the public dialogue of Greece and Italy on the one hand, and the UK and the US, you see much more theatricality in Greece and Italy. Obviously, I'm not saying that the public discussion is ideal in the UK and the US,
Yeah.
but the
It's just
idea of
different.
public emotion is very prevalent in Greece and Italy. But there were other sources that maybe, what would Arian know? Okay.
Well, he was the earliest, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he never read Netflixius. Some people
point.
here have read.
I mean,
So who loved?
he was the closest in time to Alexander's life, but
We have here Who Loved Alexander the Great,
Yeah.
transcript, and 0 sources.
Yeah.
Someone says here throughout his life, Alexander married 3 women and fathered at least 2 children.
average gay man.
But also had several male lovers.
Name them.
Source? No source. And this is also in Cambridge.
Hmm.
Among his closest relationship was that with his general and bodyguard Hephaestion, with the relationship often compared by ancient authors to that of the Homeric heroes Patroclus and Achilles, who were considered to be a couple in classical literature.
No, they weren't.
Alexander,
By who? Yeah.
Alexander, upon his conquering of Persia, is said to have taken King Darius's eunuch Bagos as his lover.
How could you take a eunuch as a lover?
Where? Again, sources. Okay, sources.
I mean, he was just said to
Yeah, and he
by
said,
this guy right now.
they said, source, trust me, bro.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Hephaestion unfortunately perished from fever the year before Alexander's death. Alexander was said to be devastated and lay weeping on his comrade for a day and night before being pried away. He cut his hair in mourning and staged elaborate funeral games to honor him. Such relationships were fairly common in the ancient world. It is only in the relatively recent past that homosexuality became viewed as deviant, and it is only recently the legal. Okay, so whatever. Where are the sources? There are none.
Yeah.
And also, you see, they also link it back to the Iliad and Achilles. And because there were some passages, I think, Arian, where Alexander is talking about his. He wanted to associate himself with an origin from Argos, and he was constantly talking about Achilles and Hercules. And in fact, there are passages where he was talking to his men that we've been further than Hercules did.
Yeah. But again, there's nothing in the Iliad to suggest that Achilles has a sexual relationship with Patroclus.
Another person here who reacted to the second community notes that was raised against and wokeness is Samuel Vlodowski. And he says, it's actually not unproven. It's a well-known fact that Alexander of Macedon had an affair with his top general. Source. Where's their source? Where's the source? In fact, he grieved greatly when Hephaestion died.
That means he must have been having sex.
but
I doubtless will grieve greatly when my best friends die.
But you all don't want to accept history you don't like. Whatever. Yeah. What's the source again?
You only feel sentiment to people you're having sex with. That's the real revelation here.
Yeah, that's exactly
it. Here, the Manchester Historian, that was another of the sources, says here, one must examine the sparse evidence about Alexander's life to understand his sexuality. In his early years, he showed little interest in sexual relationships. Quintus Curtius, they're writing Quintus Curtius, stated that Alexander's parents purchased a courtesan fearing that the young prince was Yenis, meaning womanish. So how is that a suggestion? I mean, sorry to break it down to you, but there are many, many people who fear that their children are going to be like that, and because they think it's a bad thing, no, whatever, it's their opinion. Just by saying that I fear my son is womanish doesn't mean that the son is gay.
No, he's
it
trans.
means that the parent is afraid that the child is going to be in a way that they don't like.
But I mean, Alexander took over Macedon when he was 19. I think he may have had things on his mind. So I ain't worried about girls. It's like, bro, I'm literally next in line to the throne. I'm invading Persia. Like, I think I've got more on my mind than girls. Sorry,
Yeah, so again,
my dad was just assassinated, anyway.
Here is another tweet from End Wokeness, and I just copy pasted the community note, because I knew that they were going to take it down. It said, readers added context. This is a source, trust me, bro, by the way. Readers added context. They thought people might want to know Alexander the Great having sexual relationship with other men is not unproven speculation. It happened. The debate among historians is more in defining his sexuality using modern standards, as these definitions were not used in ancient Greeks. And they just had a link to Google Scholar just saying, here are the people who say this.
The thing is,
and they're all 20th century people.
There's a guy there going, well, you'd complain if they put the Sacred Band of Thieves in there. It's like, well, they were explicitly a unit made up of gay lovers. Like, okay, make a documentary about that if you want to make a documentary about ancient Greek gays. Like, it's just, it's not that they didn't exist or they didn't know. And if they had thought Alexander was, I mean, in the previous one, they were like, oh, well, there's no evidence. It's just speculation that Hephaestion was, get down a bit. Whilst never explicitly stated as Alexander's lover. Yeah, because it wasn't. He was always referred to as the friend of Alexander. Yeah. That doesn't mean they had sex.
I always find it strange how they're trying to capitalize on the prestige of a historic figure. It's similar to casting people as black when they weren't. Yeah. When there are actual figures in history that might be good characters to make a series about, that they overlook and instead want to paint over European ones or straight ones.
Because they want to take something away from them.
Yes.
And if you see also down there, they say that the shrines of Achilles and Patroclus, two other likely lovers that suffered history's homosexual erasure.
Yeah, but there literally wasn't. They're like, look, the Sacred Band of Thieves is a band full of gay people. Okay, great.
It gives a whole different meaning to, a general trying to rally up his troops. Let's F them.
Did they say that in ancient Greece today?
The reasoning behind the Sacred Band is that the men wouldn't run away because they wouldn't want to leave their lovers.
Yeah. So, Josh, you mentioned something about Netflix here, because again, it all comes back to Netflixius. And I don't know, because Netflixius knew everything about history. I don't know if it's a collective project or something, but he also sort of knew everything. And this is also another magic thing from Netflix, comes from Queen Cleopatra. We have covered it and we have spoken about it.
It's definitely the face of a Greek person, isn't it?
Yeah, especially also a Ptolemean dynasty heir. And it has 1.2 out of 10. I think that's 1.2 too much. But I'm glad that they sort of gave that to it. And let me just show you this from Liberocrat Media. They're just saying, it just shows you the thing that Netflix is doing. Game, anime, books, Netflix adaptation. They have to fill the diversity quotas.
The crusade of inclusivity.
Yes. Now, I'm going to say something that is going to sound a bit weird, but I do think that Netflix is an instrument for propaganda. Hello, hello. So the question is, what is going on right now in Greece? Why would, for instance, something like that be a good idea for those who are playing progressivist identity politics in Greece? Let's listen to Peter Tatchell, if you want a source on it. It says the Greek government's bill legalizing gay marriage and adoption right has received widespread support among parliamentarians. Bravo. If passed, Greece will become the 37th country and the first Orthodox nation to recognize same-sex marriage in national law. Hurrah. Now, this is a conversation that should take place in Greece, but not in the way that it does. You don't get ignoramuses from left and right and anywhere to just shout in a catty way to each other. This is a dialogue that hasn't taken place in Greece, a serious dialogue about it. The people haven't been asked. And I don't know to what extent this is an agenda that is popular also with not only with the people, but also with the main party. So there are concerns that the ruling party right now is pushing forward an agenda that is, you could say, progressivist friendly on all sorts of things without people wanting. And let me just say one thing. In December, they pushed forward a bill that legalized 30,000 illegal migrants. And they said that Greeks are not working in the fields. We need them. But they did it in a way that was really interesting. The main party said, if you don't vote for it and you're a member of that party, you're erased from the party. You're losing your position from the party. So if all of you don't agree, anyone doesn't agree with it, they get erased from the party. Now, I don't think they're going to do the same with this because I want to be fair and present things. But the point is that the family law in Greece is so intertwined that if they grant gay marriage, they sort of immediately grant adoption rights. Right. And the conservative argument would be, well, if several countries, as Tatchell says, 37th, if other 36 countries have walked down this road, why not? And there are significant concerns about how this impacts children. Why not wait and see the long-term effects on children from the other 36 countries? And instead of doing that, which is the appropriate and the sensible thing to do, to just rush and virtue signal to the progressives of the West that we are pushing forward that agenda. So that's something that is an interesting side to note. And just to end on an important point, history is intertwined with memory. It is a form of creating a collective memory. And it is also who we are. The more we learn about history, the more we learn about our origins and how we have been shaped from historical forces and influences. So this is something that requires the utmost reverence. It requires focus on method and seriousness. It shouldn't be used for short-term political gains. This sort of is an idea, an agenda that is just says, I'm going to use history just to brainwash you. I'm not going to care about who you are. I'm not going to care about how your identity has been shaped. I just care about the short-term political gains of a group that is being represented. So I think that's profoundly disrespectful. And just say that it's not just Netflix. You could say it's also Disney.
Oh, yeah.
Elon Musk circulated this, and feel free to look. It says an anonymous source just sent me this from Disney. It's mandatory institutionalized racism and sexism. It's all about the quotas. To say, and that was also, when you want to apply to several key positions and jobs in several institutions, one of the questions is, how do you promote diversity? For instance, in the university I was in, they were saying, how do you promote diversity?
Yeah.
How have you promoted diversity? And they say all these quotas there. So we live in an age that profoundly disrespects history. By profoundly disrespecting history, national identity is being profoundly disrespected. And I think that this is unbelievably pernicious and should be resisted.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the website, such as the Symposium series, this episode on Humboldt's classical liberalism. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.